Welcome to Food for Thought. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau from Compassionate Cooks. I founded Compassionate Cooks to empower people to make informed food choices and to debunk myths about vegetarianism and animal rights. You can learn more about who we are and what we do by visiting our website, compassionatecooks.com. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't receive an email from one of you telling me how this podcast is inspiring you or helping you, which basically means there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not incredibly grateful and moved and humbled by your honesty and authenticity and openness and humility. Thank you for giving me a tremendous amount of hope. It is such a gift. Your sponsorships are also gifts for which I am very grateful. I wish I could do this podcast every day and include a way to have, a call-in segment to hear your questions and be able to answer them. I think there's a lot of different directions we can go with this podcast, and with your support, with your help, this might be possible someday. There are two generous sponsors for today's episode. One is Peter Walker, who contributed in honor of his wife, Mariana Yaksit. I hope you're well, Mariana. Our other generous sponsor is Brian Shamadi, who, along with his partner Michael Colmer, dedicated his contribution to his sister-in-law, Meredith Larson of Grand Forks, North Dakota, who was, quote, so inspired by family members and the Food for Thought podcast that she has become vegetarian. May you and everyone listening reap the many physical and intangible benefits of this lifestyle. Thank you again, Brian, Michael, and Peter. I'm very grateful for your support. If you would like to help me keep this podcast going and expand it, you can visit www.compassionatecooks.com and click on support our podcast. I do encourage you to read some of the comments. I can barely keep that document updated since I hear from so many of you amazing people. Anyway, you can contribute whatever amount you like, and thank you. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at podcast@compassionatecooks.com. I want to dedicate another episode to animals. This time I want to talk about pigs, how wonderful they are, how we misrepresent them in our society, and what effect that has on our treatment of them. Pigs get a pretty bad rap in our society and are exploited and used by humans in a variety of ways as research tools, as food animals, in high school science classes where pig fetuses are used for dissection, as entertainment in something called hog-baiting or hog-dogging. It's a blood sport whereby a pig or a boar is baited and then mauled by a dog. Blood sport. That's for fun. As the quarry in hunts that take place for sport, for fun, or to fulfill some kind of personal quest, as in the case of Michael Pollan, who writes about killing a sow in his book because he had, quote, gotten it into my head that I wanted to prepare a meal I had hunted, gathered, and grown myself. Why? To see if I could do it. I've always been deeply saddened and disturbed by the fact that amidst all the praise for his book, not one person has ever questioned the ethics of a journalist killing an animal just to see if he could, just for the purpose of, journalism, for education, for self-improvement. I do find it interesting that included in the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics is something called the harm limitation principle. One of the suggestions in this harm limitation principle is to, quote, show good taste, avoid pandering to lurid curiosity. What was Pollan's intention? To see if I could do it. Another piece of advice in this code of ethics cautions pursuit of the news is not a license for arrogance. About his quote unquote thrilling hunt and shooting of the wild pig, Pollan asserted that the sow he shoots, quote, has had the chance to fulfill its wild nature and has lived and arguably even died in a manner consistent with its creaturely character. By the standards of animal death, it was a good one. Though he sounds like he actually believes he did the sow a favor by killing her, he couldn't possibly say the same thing about the other pig he shot, who staggered away and probably died a very slow, very painful death. But then again, they're just pigs. Perhaps the most common way we abuse pigs is through our language. The way we talk about pigs creates our perception of them, and our perception enables us to treat them as we do. It's a cycle. Our depiction of them is a reflection of, in my opinion, the shame and the discomfort we feel at treating intelligent, sentient beings with cruelty and with disregard. And at the same time, in order to continue treating them as mere production tools or research tools or tools for enjoyment or curiosity, it is imperative that we shape our perception of them such that we view them as lowly, as dirty, messy, sloppy, insignificant, fat, well, just pigs. Here are a few expressions and words we use in our daily lives without thinking, without intending to cause harm. I realize this has become part of our language, and we're not really aware that we're using such language that ultimately denigrates an animal. Self-righteous pig, capitalist pig, fascist pig, liberal pig, fill-in-the-blank pig, stupid pig, fat pig, filthy pig, greedy pig, sloppy pig, make a pig of myself, squeal like a stuck pig, bleed like a stuck pig, male chauvinist pig, road hog, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, sweat like a pig, to pig out, the pig police, pigsty, go whole hog, hog tie, hog the limelight, cast pearls before swine, drunken swine. If we closely examine these insults that are normally associated with pigs, you'll find that the truth is quite the opposite. Dirty, filthy, sloppy pig. Pigs are actually the cleanest animals of all. They refuse to excrete anywhere near their living or eating areas when given a choice. Most people don't know that pigs don't have functional sweat glands, so sweat like a pig makes no sense. They cool themselves off using water or mud in hot weather. They also use mud as a form of sunscreen to protect their skin from sunburn, and the mud also provides protection against flies and parasites. Sounds pretty smart if you ask me. Stupid pig. Despite the insinuation, pigs are very curious and insightful animals. They're said to have the intelligence beyond that of an average 3-year-old human child, and beyond that of even our beloved domestic dogs. Pigs are incredibly friendly and vocal and loyal, and like humans, they form complex social units. Pigs have really good memories, and newborn piglets learn to run to their mother's voices, and mother pigs sing to their young while they nurse. When given the chance to live outside of animal factories, pigs spend hours playing and lying in the sun, exploring their surroundings with their powerful sense of smell. You can visit www.peacefulprairie.org. It's a sanctuary in Colorado, or www.pigspeace.org, a sanctuary in Washington state, to get to know some wonderful pigs. And if you can visit the sanctuaries, even better, and get to know these animals. And please do support their work. And you can see some pictures of me and some wonderful pigs, some of my best friends, on my website, compassionatecooks.com. There's just some amazing, amazing pigs there. Eat like a pig. Despite this blatant insult, pigs don't overeat when given access to unlimited food, although they can find food wherever it is because of their amazing snouts that enable them to root in the ground for roots and mushrooms. The commercial pork industry, however, gives pigs a drug called hog crave, which causes pigs to overeat so that they will grow faster and will thus be more profitable to those who kill them. Of course, commercial pig food is also laced with growth hormones and antibiotics, which also cause them to grow fast. But it's important to note that when we think of pigs, we usually think of the huge domestic pigs that are bred and killed for human consumption. And we forget that we created these overweight creatures, and then we scorn them as fat pigs. What most people don't know is that they grow so large not because of hormones they put in their food, but because of how we've genetically modified them. In other words, if you took a day-old domestic piglet from a modern-day operation, 1 day old, and you raised him on, natural food without growth hormones, antibiotics, etc., they will still grow huge because of how we've genetically changed them to do so. Pigs weigh about 2.5 pounds at birth, and they're slaughtered at 6 months old, 6 months young, when they are 250 pounds. So they're 250 pounds, that's their quote-unquote slaughter weight, and if left to grow, as in places like Peaceful Prairie or Pig's Peace, they become huge. Pigs can live to about 10, even the domestic pigs, but many of them have debilitating back and hip problems. Many become paralyzed because their skeletons can't support their weight. Don't forget, the whole idea of having them grow this quickly, this large, this quickly, means that they would be killed at 6 months. The whole idea was for them not to grow, live past 6 months old. So when they are allowed to grow, when they're allowed to live, these domestic animals just continue to grow. They're so huge, and it's so unnatural. I mean, we're kind of in awe of their size, but it's not natural, and it's not comfortable. It's not healthy. It's not safe for them. I hear from some people, and I've heard this excuse before. People have written to me and said, well, they hear people say, well, these animal activists, they don't really care if these animals go extinct. They want to see, if we all stopped eating these animals would go extinct. Let me tell you something. I have no ethical problem with the domestic animals that we have created to be these Frankenstein-like monsters going extinct. This is not natural. These are not wild animals. If you compare them to the ancestor, the wild boar, if you compare these domestic pigs to their ancestors, you'll see that they're a lot smaller. I have no problem with these animals going extinct because we created them. They suffer immensely in their huge bodies. So I hope that makes sense. If we think about the stories starring pigs that we read when we're growing up or we watch growing up, and movies that are still coming out today, such as Charlotte's Web or Babe, we would see that these stories are not about pigs living in animal factory conditions. These are stories about people who have had a change of heart and fight to keep these pigs alive despite the social and family pressure to do what was intended all along, kill these animals. I mean, Fern, the little girl in Charlotte's Web who's responsible for sparing Wilbur's life, might have to be considered the youngest direct action activist we've ever seen. In the first chapter of the book, as she's begging her father to spare Wilbur, she's described as literally pulling the axe out of her father's hands. Talk about a courageous little girl. And she persuades her father to let her take care of Wilbur and raise him. In the film Babe, the farmer, played by James Cromwell, an amazing vegan animal activist, clearly sympathizes with this little pig. He's a sheep herder. He's a sheep farmer, and so I think he's given this pig as a prize at some county fair. And he likes this pig immediately, as the narrator says, something passed between them, the faintest hint of a common destiny. These stories don't teach us that animals on factory farms are mistreated, but it's okay for us to raise and kill animals on small farms. These were small farms. What you come away with is that non-human animals have their own individual personalities, their own unique contributions. I think the other thing we come away with is that through our interactions with these animals, we have the potential for our own transformations. And these transformations aren't necessarily all positive. It depends on the circumstances of our interactions. When we meet the animals in sanctuary settings where they're allowed to be individuals and we see their inherent value, we experience very positive transformations. However, what happens if we're forced into a very different relationship with them? I'm not sure if I've ever told the story about my journey to awakening, but what ultimately did it for me was reading the book Slaughterhouse, the shocking story of greed, neglect, and inhumane treatment inside the U.S. meat industry. In this book, investigative journalist Gail Eisnitz visits all the slaughterhouses in the United States and asks workers in each slaughterhouse the same set of questions. This way she couldn't be accused of visiting what was, an exception, the bad apple argument. Anyway, what the workers in these slaughterhouses reveal was so painful. I was a puddle for an entire week reading this, but I kept reading the book. I wept profusely every day and could only read a few pages at a time. But I felt like I owed it to the animals to keep reading. Perhaps it was excruciating for me to read, but it wasn't nearly as horrific as what they endured day in and day out. And just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, over 100 million pigs are raised and slaughtered in the U.S. every year. 100 million every year in the U.S. In reading this book, I came to realize I had stopped eating land animals at that point, but I came to realize that no matter where a pig came from, no matter how an animal was raised, no matter if she was being used for her eggs, for her milk, for her flesh, all animals wind up in the same place, this dirty, violent, disgusting place, the slaughterhouse. I also realize that the abuses that take place against the animals are so much worse than the actual slaughter that will finally end the animal's suffering. These are abuses that take place in any situation when an individual or group is given unchecked power over another individual or group, particularly when you add ridiculous amounts of stress and violence. This was immediately apparent to me when I first saw the Abu Ghraib prison photos, or when I first heard about the well-known 1971 Stanford prison experiment, which answered the question, what happens when you put good people in an evil place? Slaughterhouse answered that question for me. Finally, the other thing I noticed, and I may be wrong here, but there was something about slaughterhouse workers' treatment of pigs that was particularly disturbing. I mean, every species has obscene and perverted acts of cruelty perpetrated against them, but it seemed that it was consistently egregious against pigs. And I've often wondered if that isn't because the workers recognize the pigs' intelligence and sensitivity, which make them feel worse about what they're doing, and the response is to lash out even more. It's something I think about a lot. So, as I always say before sharing upsetting information, if we can't listen to it, then we need to examine whether we want to participate in it. Shielding ourselves against painful knowledge doesn't make it go away. I know it's painful, but it's real. The following quotes are from a series of interviews that Eisnitz conducted with workers at Morel, one of the main pig slaughterhouses, and you can read the book for yourself, certainly. It's on my website. For many of the men, it almost seems like it's a relief to talk about this, like it's very painful and they're talking about it really for the first time. And many of them numb their pain with alcohol. Many slaughterhouse workers admit to becoming heavy drinkers to numb the pain. And domestic abuse is incredibly high in the houses of slaughterhouse workers. Just to give you some vocabulary so you know what they're talking about when I read their quotes. In a slaughterhouse, these are the names given to the different workers in this assembly line. There are the drivers, the men who force the pigs, drive the pigs into the restrainers, the stunners who are supposed to drive a captive bolt pistol into the skull of a pig to render him unconscious, the shacklers, the workers who shackle and hoist what are supposed to be unconscious pigs, the stickers, whose role it is to stab the pigs to kill them. A good sticker sticks about 900 hogs an hour. The scalders, the ones responsible for the scalding tank, a 140-degree tank that burns the hair off. The incidents of conscious pigs making their way to the shacklers, to the stickers, and the scalders are beyond what I could recount here. Let's just say it was more common than not. Finally, they're eviscerated and they're chopped up by another line of workers. I promise you I end on a happy note. Here are just a few quotes from workers. Animal abuse is so common that workers who've been in the industry for years get into a state of apathy about it. After a while, it doesn't seem unusual anymore. In the wintertime, there are always hogs stuck to the sides and floors of the trucks. They go in there with wires or knives and just cut or pry the hogs loose. The skin pulls right off. These hogs were alive when we did this. Animal abuse at Morel is so commonplace, nobody even thinks about it. Sometimes I grab a pig by the ear and stick it right through the eye. I'm not just taking its eye out. I'll go all the way to the hilt, right up through the brain and wiggle the knife. Instant ragdoll. It's the same thing with an animal who pisses you off, except it's in the stick pit. You're going to kill it. Only you don't just kill it. You go in hard, push hard, blow the windpipe, make it drown in its own blood, split its nose. A live hog would be running around the pit. It would just be looking up at me, and I'd be sticking, and I would just take my knife and cut its eye out while it was just sitting there. One time I took my knife, it's sharp enough, and I sliced off the end of a hog's nose, just like a piece of bologna. I took a handful of salt brine and ground it into his nose. I stuck the salt right up the hog's ass. It's nothing anyone should be proud of. It was my way of taking out my frustration. Another time, there was a live hog in the pit. It hadn't done anything wrong, wasn't even running around the pit, it was just alive. I took a 3-foot chunk of pipe, 2-inch diameter, and I literally beat that hog to death. Couldn't have been a 2-inch piece of solid bone left in its head. Basically, if you want to put it in layman's terms, I crushed his skull. It was like I started hitting the hog and I couldn't stop. And when I finally did stop, I expended all this energy and frustration, and I'm thinking, what in God's sweet name did I do? But I wasn't the only guy doing this kind of stuff. One guy I work with actually chases hogs into the scalding tank. And everybody, hog drivers, shacklers, utility men, uses lead pipes on hogs. Everybody knows it, all of it. When I first started driving hogs from Morel, back in 1985, we used leather slappers to prod them, but whipping the hogs hard with these slappers left marks on the animals and damaged the meat. So management started issuing electric prods. At Morel's, they were vicious with them. If a hog don't want to go up to the restrainer and you don't have a pipe handy, you shove the prod in his eye and you hold it in his eye, and that changes his attitude. You're under all this stress, all this pressure. Hogs get stressed out pretty easy. If you prod them too much, they have heart attacks. If you get a hog in the chute that's had the crap prodded out of him and has a heart attack or refuses to move, you take a meat hook and hook it into his anus. Then you drag him backwards. You're dragging these hogs alive, and a lot of times the meat hook rips right out of the anus. I've seen thighs completely ripped open. I've also seen intestines come out. If the hog collapses near the front of the chute, you shove the meat hook into his cheek and drag him forward. The worst thing, worse than the physical danger, is the emotional toll. If you work in that stick pit for any period of time, you develop an attitude that lets you kill things, but doesn't let you care. You may look a hog in the eye that's walking around the blood pit with you, and you think, God, that really isn't a bad-looking animal. You may want to pet it. Pigs on the kill floor have come up to me and nuzzled me like a puppy. 2 minutes later, I had to kill them, beat them to death with a pipe. I can't care. Sometimes I looked at people that way too. I've had ideas of hanging my foreman upside down on the line and sticking him. Every sticker I know carries a gun, and every one of them would shoot you. Most stickers I know have been arrested for assault. A lot of them have problems with alcohol. They have to drink. They have no other way of dealing with killing, live, kicking animals all day long. If you stop and think about it, you're killing several thousand beings a day. Are you still there? Take a deep breath. I know that's really difficult to hear. So why do we do this? Why do we do this? My answer? Because we can. We've relegated pigs to this role, and we reinforce that role in our everyday actions and in our everyday depictions and descriptions of pigs. What characteristics do non-human animals need to possess in order for us to stop exploiting them and hurting them? And when we hear stories of pigs that are heroes, that pigs who save their humans, just the way we hear about dogs doing the same thing, it doesn't change anything. What characteristics do they need in order for us to stop? Is it intelligence? If so, then we should be just as appalled at the idea of eating pigs as we would be at the idea of eating dogs or 3-year-old humans. Is it affection? Is it playfulness? Is it cleanliness? Is it the ability to create bonds and social systems? Is it to possess maternal instincts? Is it the ability to suffer, to feel pain, to bleed? Pigs possess all of these characteristics in spades, so what will it take? What do animals need to do in order for us to leave them alone? What more could they do? Or is it up to them at all? Perhaps not. Perhaps it's up to us. In order to change our treatment of them, we need to change our perceptions of them. We need to change our notions of what we need to eat in order to survive and thrive, and pigs need not be on that list. We need to be really honest with ourselves about why we make the choices we do and let go of the excuses we tell ourselves in order to assuage the guilt we may feel. We need to recognize that when we purchase such things as ham, bacon, pork, sausage, anything that comes from a pig, that infused in the fat and the salt and the preservatives is suffering and violence and pain. Pain and violence that was experienced not only by the pigs, but also by the drivers, the shacklers, the stunners, the stickers and the scalders, by the wives and the children of these men whose pain, physical and emotional, is so great that they can't but take it out on those with whom they share their homes and lives. If we can't kill animals with our own hands, and if we couldn't imagine these things being done to the animals with whom we share our lives, the familiar animals, the cats and dogs, then perhaps we need to ask ourselves, what's the difference? To the animals, it's all the same. To help create new stories, new perceptions of pigs, visit sanctuaries or at least their websites to get to know the personalities of the individual pigs. Read Jeffrey Mason's book, The Pig Who Sang to the Moon. Read The Good, Good Pig, that new novel by Cy Montgomery, both of which are at my store. You can click on Stock Your Pantry from my homepage. I think it's vital to read these stories to help reshape our perceptions of pigs, re-examine the language we use. So it's just more sensitive to these misunderstood, misrepresented animals. Instead of saying, I ate like a pig, for instance, I often say, I ate like a glutton, sweat like a pig. Well, how about sweat like a human, since pigs don't really sweat? You get the idea. Our language reflects our perception, and our perceptions create our behavior. I wanted to end today's podcast with a narrative or a poem that honors pigs, and I searched far and wide looking for just the right piece. My heart was so heavy because I found so little that actually paid homage to pigs, but I was determined not to give up, and I'm so glad I didn't. I'm going to share with you the most beautiful poem by one of the great American poets of the 20th century and one of my favorite poets. Readers of poetry will be familiar with Galway Kinnell. He is a Pulitzer-prize winning poet born in 1927, whose poems recall Walt Whitman. And Galway Kinnell is still alive today and living in Vermont. This poem is one of his most well-known, and it's very special on many levels for me. I couldn't have found a poem that's more reverent to our porcine friends, and I'm very grateful to Galway Kinnell for writing it. The poem is called St. Francis and the Sow. And just to give you a little context, St. Francis was born in Assisi in the late 12th century. And if you don't know, he's considered the patron saint of animals. Now, I grew up Catholic, and though I don't practice Catholicism anymore, you may not be surprised to hear that St. Francis was my favorite saint. When you grow up Catholic, you have favorite saints. Just trust me here. Anyway, I always loved the images of him surrounded by animals. And there are a lot of images of him surrounded by animals, and he's just lovingly tending to them or just being in their presence. And there are many stories about St. Francis freeing fish who were caught and returning them to the water. I'm leaving for Italy in a few days, and we'll be visiting Assisi, and we're staying right near Lake Trasimeno in Umbria, where, according to legend, in 1211, St. Francis returned a fish to this lake who was caught by local fishermen and given to St. Francis. And the grateful fish followed St. Francis around the lake until the saint dispensed a special blessing. So this is the lake we're staying right near. He's famous for treating animals as, quote, brothers and sisters. And there are just many stories of him communicating with animals. This poem, however, honors not St. Francis, but the pig, the sow, an animal who deserves our praise and needs our voice. St. Francis and the Sow by Galway Kinnell. The bud stands for all things, even for those things that don't flower, for everything flowers from within of self-blessing. Though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on its brow of the flower and retell it in words and in touch, it is lovely, until it flowers again from within of self-blessing. As St. Francis put his hand on the creased forehead of the sow and told her in words and in touch blessings of earth on the sow, and the sow began remembering all down her thick length from the earthen snout all the way through the fodder and slops to the spiritual curl of the tail, from the hard spininess spiked out from the spine down through the great broken heart to the sheer blue milken dreaminess spurting and shuddering from the 14 teats into the 14 mouths sucking and blowing beneath them the long, perfect loveliness of sow. When asked about this poem, Galway Kinnell said, I try to see past the usual cliches about things. Pig is a pejorative word, but if you get to know them, get a feeling for them, you see that they have extraordinary beauty. When creatures don't have extraordinary beauty, it's because the person in contact with them is not seeing it. This is Colleen from Compassionate Cooks. Thanks for listening.